Hi, everyone. It's Emily Wishall. Welcome to season 5 of Radical Embodiment, the podcast. And today I'm so excited to get to bring to you Bella Blue, who is a friend of mine that I met earlier this year, mid-July in the summer, or mid-June, excuse me. We were in a fresh cadaver dissection lab together. That was our introduction and stayed in a house together. And we actually just finished and wrapped up the interview, and I'm so excited for you to listen to it. Bella has so many nuggets of wisdom. She dives right in at the start and sharing her journey through perimenopause and how she is advocating for herself through that. Bella has been a dancer since she was 3, and she really hasn't stopped since then. She's a mover, she's a shaker, she's a stripper, she's a boss, she's a mama, and a pleasure seeker. She has been an internationally recognized burlesque performer for nearly 17 years. And if you're interested in astrology, you can know she's an Aquarius, Pisces. She, again, is a mama. She's got 2 human sons. She's got 4 dogs, 4 cats, and 15 chickens. She's based out of New Orleans, and she's currently pursuing her degree in deaf studies through, I'm going to say this wrong, Gallaudet. It's the university is, I believe, in DC. And she received her first ever college degree at the age of 41 in English ASL interpreting studies. So I hope you enjoy this interview. It's just an easy conversation. We could have gone on for much, much longer. I had so many more questions I could have asked, but enjoy the conversation with Bella. And she's got make sure to listen all the way into the end. She's got a really good just suggestion practice if you're desiring to live a more radically embodied life. Hi, everyone. Here I am with Bella Blue. Bella, I'm excited to have you. And I'm just looking forward to getting to dive into this conversation and
Me
see what.
too. Thank you so much for asking.
So we'll go on this a little later, but Bella and I met in a cadaver lab. So we really, our introduction to each other was really through seeing the insides of the human body.
Of other people.
Of
Mhm.
other people. Good clarification. And the question I always start with the interviews of my podcast with is, what does embodiment mean to you? But it felt important just to kind of preface, because it's kind of an interesting, unique situation I feel like you and I have of like, that was our first meeting of each other.
I
And
agree. It's an intense way to meet a person.
now we get to be here together talking about embodiment in life. So what does an embodiment mean to you?
To me, I think embodiment is, I feel that embodiment means that a person's ability to, and this is going to sound really just like base level answer, but it is truly the ability to live in a body, the one that you were born in, ideally, or inhabit, right? And not only is it just your mode of it's not just a flesh suit that's like carrying your soul around that you just have to kind of get through until you die. But it's the ability to really show up and understand your body so deeply in such a way that it reinforces your humanity, I guess, if that makes any sense. So it just is and it's the practice of not shying away from the things that are inevitably uncomfortable or painful or awkward, or something that requires, it's not always the easiest thing to do maybe for a certain body, but approaching that with curiosity and maybe a little determination to get to the other side, because that's where that connection just gets deeper and deeper and deeper. And it's like knowing your body better than anyone else knows it. Yeah.
Especially that ending, right? Because it feels like, and then I'm going to ask you a specific question on your definition to go deeper in
Sure.
it. But speaking of knowing your body better than anyone else, a theme that's been in my life and with clients and friends the last few weeks, few months, has really been how much we have to advocate for ourselves, specifically
Yep.
like in our medical system.
Oh,
And
100%.
like,
And I can expand on that more too as a person who's currently in perimenopause.
yeah, please. I mean,
It's there's so many things, but
yeah,
I
yeah.
digress. We can
We're gonna have so much to talk
so many
about.
things.
Yeah, but I just feel like, yeah, you really have to advocate for yourself. So I think the better you can know your body, and that means
Mhm.
really inviting time to listen, which
Yeah.
is challenging in a
and
really
and
busy
pay
world.
attention, because really we're just taught the opposite anyway, at least in our society here in the West, is to ignore the things our body are telling us, because that means that we can't work, or we can't be, overproducing, or
Yeah, yeah,
all the
yeah.
things that
All the
we
things that
weren't.
bring us quote unquote value
Right,
or make us
exactly.
valuable. So I
Mm-hmm.
would let's just dive into since you
Okay.
brought up perimenopause, kind of your experience
Yeah.
with advocating and learning and knowing and trusting your body
Mm-hmm.
and that.
So I have spent, I'm 41, I'll be 42 in January, and I've spent a considerable amount of years getting, doing the work to be at home in my body. And a big part of that is also has been being really familiar with my cycles, and down to a T. Like, I could tell you when I'm ovulating, I could tell you what day my period's going to start. I could tell you all the things. And that was it's like an art. Like, it definitely,
Yeah.
it is a practice, and it is a study, and is really listening and understanding what's going on with their body. And so perimenopause for me, now knowing what I know about it, for me really started to kick in around 38.
Mm-hmm.
And now that I'm like learning stuff and try and looking back on symptoms and stuff, it just really started to kick into high gear though at 41, where I felt like I was just ready to like peel my own skin off, And the thing about it that's been so, there's a couple things that have been keep coming up, is like, so as a person with a uterine system, you know, why is it that every time something goes on with our bodies, especially if you are perceived or identify as female with a uterine system, why is it that every time you go through something, there's a big old shrouded mystery around it, and you have to do the work to figure it out, right? So puberty, periods, babies, abortions, postnatal care, prenatal care, like, and then
Totally.
entering into, I didn't even realize that perimenopause was even a thing. It's like this, and I was like, well, yeah, they just tell you like one day you're just going to stop getting a period,
Mm-hmm.
probably around 50, and then you'll be in menopause. And then there's this these just like conversation, I'm going to use conversations in air quotes, right? But like this rhetoric of, then all the moods and the hot flashes and the whatever. It's like that association is that it was when menopause actually hits.
Mm-hmm.
But what they don't tell us is that there's a nice 7 to 10 year time frame before the actual menopause hits, where everything is just a roller coaster. And so the hormones are all over the place, the moods are everywhere, and there's so many physical and biological changes going on. Like, my skin is really dry, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
You live in a very humid climate.
and it's super humid here,
So
right?
it
And
just
I
feels
was
like important.
weird.
Since
I
I live
was
in a
like,
dry climate, that feels important to
yeah.
me. Yeah.
And so like I was noticed a few months ago, I was like, all my cuticles are like shredding, you
Wow.
know? And I was like, what is this? And I thought it was some supplements that I was taking that were for and like to target inflammation. So I was like, well, it must be just like drawing all the moisture into my joints to keep my, that's just kind of what I thought. But I noticed that my moods got significantly way more unstable, for
Mm-hmm.
lack of a better term. Um, I can wake up in the middle of the night around 2 a.m. and I'm just awake. Fatigue, like, and then other things that that I remember hearing this as I was growing up, of like, oh, you just get older and there's aches and pains and there's this and that, and all of that stems from a reduction of the hormones that you need in your body, So like, and it is a truly a roller coaster. I was just telling my friends, I was like, not last weekend, but the weekend before, and I had shows and I was doing shows and I was literally just coming home and getting right into bed because my joints were so angry and like my hands were so swollen and then woke up Monday and was like ting and like got out of bed and was like I have all the energy and I'm going to do everything. Yeah, I was like this is so it's so maddening because it's such a roller coaster, you
Yeah, it
know.
feels like
It makes it
unpredictable.
hard to really make plans or like to I'm hyper aware now about like overcommitting and hyper aware of like if I'm not really into something, I need to say no because if my hormones are on a tear that day, I'm definitely not going. Um, just different stuff. A lot of crying for no
Mm.
reason. Snappy snap. Anyway, I'm just saying all this to say because I go actually tomorrow have an appointment to start the process of HRT
Yeah,
for
okay.
hormone replacement therapy. But
Yeah.
um, I say all that because it's like you spend all this time getting to know your body, being in it, getting to know everything, your cycles, and all of the rhythms of it, and then all of a sudden you're just like ran headfirst into a brick wall because it's like everything I've put all this time and effort to learning is like none of that matters anymore because now everything's brand new again. So I have to start over from
Like I was like,
scratch.
hi. And I feel
Just
like that's a
kidding.
lot of like being, in like a female identified body, through the cycles of
Yeah.
life, there's probably a lot. And I really
Yeah.
appreciate you sharing specifically and kind of drawing out each symptom, everything that you've
Yeah.
been feeling, because to help normalize it and talk about it
Mm-hmm.
more. And
Anxiety, people experience heightened anxiety right before their period. They will experience deep depression. They will experience mood. Like it's all over the place and it's different for everybody. So like there's no one stop shop or one cure all or one, and hormones are so mysterious.
They are. I had a friend, she shared this with me about a year ago, but she, was going through menopause and had a male doctor, and she
Yep.
was sharing about night sweats and how it was keeping, just the fluctuation or temperature, how it was keeping her awake, and like
Yep.
how quickly it would change, and she had to open the window and then throw on the next minute,
And then
so
you're
many sweats.
freezing, right? You're so
And
hot and
his
then you're cold
response
and
was,
oh God.
just deal with it. Women have been dealing with it for centuries. I
Yep.
was like, you
Yep.
got to be kidding me.
And
Get
you just want to
anyway.
be like, ree, ree, ree.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, it angers me
Mm-hmm.
so much. And I know that she's not alone in her experience, and I know that that can be experienced across the board in different spectrums of our cycles through life.
Totally.
So, you've been like a mover in movement world since, I
Yeah.
think you said, like since 3, and you're
I was
deeply,
3. Yeah.
involved in your body, know your body. Movement's a huge part of
Yeah.
who you are in the world, what you offer in the world. Probably, I would imagine, a big regulator for you.
Totally.
How would you say having that such a big part of your life and knowing your body that way, how has that supported you through this process and supported you and even just advocating for yourself?
I think because it has so big part of it too was like I'm so familiar with how things used to be that I can speak to it really well with the medical provider. And then I started tracking all the other changes. And so I'd keep a log of like, okay, this date, this was going on. This date, this was going, so I can be like, look, this is what used to happen. And now this is all the shit that's happening now. You can't tell me that those things are not, you know, um, I think that it has forced me to be uh, getting more and more comfortable with not forcing myself to push through things that I don't necessarily need to or have to
Mm-hmm.
because it's not worth it. You know, it has put me in a position where the things that I'm going to put the output of energy into have to be really worth it for me because there's not a whole lot to go around anymore. It feels like that energy pool is getting smaller and smaller and smaller as the changes of my body start to really happen. And I'm like, oh, I'm like, you hear about this and you hear about people getting divorced or leaving relationships or big friendships ending, or because you just start to really become so familiar with like what your tolerance level is anymore for and how you want to spend the energy that you have,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Yeah.
And I think it's why women or people with uterine systems and our that are going through this experience get especially aggressively categorized as like bitches and ornery, and you know what I mean? Like
I
there's
do.
this
Yeah.
really negative
Yeah.
association that just is like compounded on top of everything else about like getting older, you know?
Well, and it's like such a unkind, unfair, untrue
It is.
labeling of, oh, if a woman isn't smiling, if she's just not like gracious and warm, then she's a bitch. And
Right.
I love how you identified, like it feels like the gift and really honoring yourself in this process is, okay, there's only this much energy, and I am really clear of like, this is what I'm up for, this is what I'm not. If I'm like
Yeah.
kind of a maybe, but not really into it, then I'm probably a no. Like that's a huge
It
gift.
gets you real comfortable with it real fast. And at the same time, I have found anyway, like my strong urges to like people please
Mm-hmm.
are getting less and less and less because I don't care. You don't like it? Oh well. Like, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
I
it's
don't
huge.
have the space for that, or the, or I'm not doing that because I don't have to. And not in like a not in like a terrible way though. Like I've definitely had a friend that messaged and she was like, "Hey, maybe go do this thing in 2 weeks." And I pull out my calendar because I'm so conscious and like, where am I going to be in my
Mhm.
cycle? Does it make sense for me to commit to this? And I can say, "Thank you so much for asking me. I don't feel comfortable totally committing 100%. And here's why." And I can say, and I don't have any issue. I'm like, my hormones are all over the place and I do not know how I'm going to feel in 2 weeks.
And it's beautiful because
And
you're being
that,
honest. You're not committing to something and then last minute
right.
failing, and you're
Bailing
letting
or
them in
making
on your experience, which is,
excuses.
yeah,
Right.
vulnerable. Yeah,
Yep.
for people who you care about. Yeah.
Totally. And
Yeah.
so, you know, I think that it is just, it's, it's a part. I imagine that for people who don't practice embodiment or just have so much fear or trauma or anything, whatever it is about being in the body, that this experience has got to feel so much more difficult. I
Mm-hmm.
can't even imagine. I think about my mother, who my mom passed away when she was 46. So we never really got to talk about this kind of phase of life. And I don't really know if she would have anyway, because it wasn't really her style. But for instance, though, like I know she was not an embodied human being by any stretch. And so she was now looking back and like knowing what I know, I'm like, oh, she was totally in the throes of this nightmare,
Mm-hmm.
and she didn't have she maybe didn't have even just like the body awareness enough to recognize what was even happening.
Yeah.
And
Which is,
meanwhile, everyone will just gaslight you into thinking you're bonkers,
yeah, exactly. Exactly. I was going to say there's huge power in having an idea or semblance when hormones are such variability wherever we're at, of being able to
Yes.
look and track and name it and be like, oh, I'm not crazy, or I'm not just making, it's like, oh, this is
Yeah.
also happening. It's not invalidating what I'm feeling. It's not saying my emotions aren't
No.
true. It's just they're heightened because my hormones are
Yes.
doing this fluctuation or shift.
Yeah. And we need them for everything.
We
It's
need them.
crazy.
Yeah. So I'd
Crazy.
love, Bella, if you don't mind, let's like just kind of go back into your
Okay.
life story pre
Yeah.
perimenopause. Starting with,
Pre-perimenopause. Yeah.
and you can speak to, the periods or stage that whatever like sticks out to
Sure.
you. But like being that you started moving at age 3, being that,
Mm-hmm.
you're a burlesque dancer, you're a stripper, you're in
Yeah.
pole, you do so
Right.
many things. You just finished your degree,
Yeah.
and it's
One
not an ASL
degree. Yeah.
specifically, but what?
It's an English and ASL interpreting. And then currently working on my bachelor's in deaf studies right now. So,
Amazing.
ugh.
Congratulations. So it's like that's such
uh,
a spectrum.
it
Um,
is.
and I think it's really fascinating. And I think that I know I can learn, listeners can learn,
Hmm.
or just, yeah, be inspired by kind of
For
your
sure.
journey.
So when I was growing up, I started dancing just like kind of most kids. And um, I started to figure out that it was something I was pretty good at around 7. And I started to really take it seriously from there. I was at like one dance school for these classes and a different dance school for those classes and another school for ballet. And I was kind of all over the place. And it was the thing that I was the most good at, and school was not the thing I was most good at, right? But I could negotiate enough and get through school to be able to do dance, and I was like, I'm going to be a dancer. I'm going to be a dancer. I'm going to be a dancer. That was like what I was going to do. Um, that's just what it was the thing. I don't even remember growing up and being like, oh, I love this because I just feel so in my body. It's like, that's not, you know, that we didn't have that language
Yeah.
back then anyway. But as a teenager, it's definitely not, you're just like, what it did do originally was it did some negative stuff at first, right? So of course it's like there's the pressure of like aesthetics, and you're in a mirror constantly, and dysmorphia, and lots of comments about weight, lots of comments about all kinds of stuff really don't have any control over. It's just how your body is going to grow and develop because you're a teenager.
Mhm.
Then and then, fast forward, like I had my kids. I was still teaching dance. I was still kind of in and out of the scene, um and then I started to I had a really random experience. I was on MySpace and I found someone else's profile, and they were doing burlesque, and at the time in New Orleans we were still very much post Katrina, and this person had been doing burlesque for about 6 months or something. And I just was like, hey, I've never done burlesque before. I've never stripped before, but I do know how to dance. And so if you're ever holding an audition, I'd love to audition. And so that's how that came to be. Started doing burlesque and really started to figure out that that kind of movement had some freeing power to it. And I didn't even fully understand it at the time either. I was like 26, 25. I was 25. Ugh. And I didn't even get it. I just knew that it was so, I could use all this technique, I could use all this experience, I could use my talents, and then I could also do it in a way that was a bit more risque, quote unquote, or felt a little more not, more freedom in the movement in that way, and that it was okay. It was okay. This was in 2007, so it was still there was still a we were not that we aren't patriarchal now, but it was more patriarchal than in
Yeah.
2007, and
Yeah.
there was a lot of hate and a lot of shit um for it. And I started stripping in strip clubs about a year actually after I started doing burlesque. I had 2 kids that were young and in private school, and I had another friend that did burlesque, and she worked at Rick's Cabaret on Bourbon, and she's like, you should just come try it. She's like, you'd be great at it. And I was like, oh my god, do you think so? And when I was a teenager, a young mom, um also a teenager, I was working at Victoria's Secret, and I had this customer, and she would come in, and she was a stripper at Rick's. And I remember at the time I was like 19 or 20, and she was like 36, and I was like, oh my god, she's just like so mature. And to me, she was just like, you know, she was
Mm.
like a woman,
Mm.
and she danced. And I remember being like, how do you do it? How do you like? And she's like, it's so easy. You would make so much money. She's like, you just move slow. And I'm like, what? And um and so I always like she always was a kind of in the back of my head. And then my
Mm.
friend was like, come and do it. And so I did. And it took me several years to really kind of figure out and navigate my way through being a stripper, and then doing burlesque. And then burlesque really took over at that point, and my career kind of skyrocketed. I did a lot of touring for a while. I was doing a lot of shows and a lot of teaching. And then I was dealing with a lot of chronic pain.
Mm.
I have degenerative disc disease in my neck, and I had a boatload of trauma that I didn't even really realize. And all of that was really starting to manifest physically.
Mm.
And it was to the point where I was pretty much holding at a level 8 pain on the pain scale all the time.
Wow.
And I just got used to it. I was like, this is my life now. This is what it is. One day I'm
Mm.
going to have my neck fused. And in the meantime, I'll just dance until I can't dance until the wheels fall off.
Mm.
Um, I did a bunch of yoga teacher trainings for over the course of a few years because I thought that that might be a next sort of natural
Mm.
step into something different that was still movement based, but didn't require me to have to be so physical. I could teach with my voice.
Mm.
Started then realized didn't love all the aspects of that industry, and I was like, okay, I'm glad I like learned a lot from that experience, and that's where I started to get more into the anatomy of things and started
Mm.
to get really interested in the anatomical aspect of movement. And
Mm.
so this was around 2018, I guess, 2017, 2018. um and then just like as time moved on and these injuries really started to kind of take over my world, and I thought that at some point it really was going to be the end all. Like I was like, this is it. I don't know how much longer I'm really going to be able to. I remember being in my 37 or and having a hip injury and just being like, this is it. I guess this, and just like feeling so defeated and feeling so young at the same time and
Mm.
being like, how can this just be the end? So right before the pandemic hit, I had been in this position where I was just ready to scale back. I was producing like 25 shows a month. I was teaching all the time. I was teaching yoga, I was teaching burlesque, I was teaching dance, I was traveling, I was performing. I had a minimum of 5 shows a week. It was just too much. It was too many things. But those things happen gradually. It's not like you just woke up one day and it was like boom,
Mhm.
25 shows. Anyway, and I right before that I was like, what am I going to do? Like I have got to back off. I'm so tired.
Mm.
And then the pandemic hit. And
You have a break.
and then I was like, oh, well, here's a break.
Hmm.
Um, so around April was when I really started to accept. I was like, okay, this is not gonna be, this is gonna be a minute, and I need to start thinking outside the box here. So that's when I registered for school, and we have one ASL program in the whole state. And it's at the community college here. It's just a 2-year program, and I enrolled for that. And um, because of that, I also wanted to hold myself accountable to have to get up and move my body. And so I signed up. I like bought a class pack at the pole studio. So I would go to the pole studio and just like do a class here and there, or just go in to like brush up on some things or whatever. Um, I had taken a break from the club and then went back. And before I went back, I like went and took a few classes just to make sure I felt confident and whatever. Um, and then that was it. And pole had changed so much. It had gone from this thing where we were just doing pole in the clubs and kind of teaching each other how to do stuff and just hoping we didn't fall from the ceiling and break a hip. Whereas
Hmm.
at this point now, there were so many different styles and teachers and people and approaches and all of that stuff. And so Marlo came up on my For You page, and
Hmm.
I clicked on it and I was like, what is this? Who is this? And I
And just
click
a
and
quick,
watching
if
her,
she doesn't know, Marla Fiskin,
Marla Fiskin.
is
Hmm.
how Bella actually and I met, and yeah.
Yeah. And seeing how her approach to pole, and we had
Mm.
similar backgrounds, and so the way that she taught made sense to me because there was a lot of the ways that she describes movement, taught movement, and I think experiences movement in her own body, and those really resonated with me. And so I kind of like latched on and like followed her teaching and like how she did it and learned and continue to learn quite a bit. And it just opened up this whole world of movers from there, like after following her, and then the algorithm does its thing,
Mhm.
you know?
Mhm.
And it really opened up a whole world of other kinds of movement practitioners and other kinds of movement and other, yeah. And so I've just been like just pulling this all in. And then you combine that with, I'm a performer anyway, so like how that feeds into performing. And then at ASL being a visual language, and it's a physical and it's a visual language. And so as a kid, I was always intrigued by ASL. I would see people doing sign language and I would just be like, what is that? And I always said, I was like, one day when I retire, I'll go back to school. I was like, because I've had this narrative of like, school isn't for people like me. But it is. And yeah. So anyway, that's like the long and short of it. I don't know if that feels helpful. And so here we are today, and here we
Here
are
you are
now.
today. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a question I have, like something I'm curious about is especially like as your dancing shifted from maybe traditional dance
Yeah.
classes to the time of going into burlesque.
Sure.
And I think you shared already, like when you were first going into burlesque and that movement that you didn't have the words of like, oh, this feels really good, my body. But
Yeah.
was there like a shift in that as far as like perspective shifting less from the aestheticness of the dance or how your body looked and more of like moving in a way that felt good or pleasurable for your body or even in the
It was
culture
both.
maybe of the classes? I'm kind of curious. Yeah, you
Yeah,
don't mind
it was
that.
it was both. And I
Mhm.
was totally self-taught in burlesque at the time. There were no classes. There wasn't anything you could go to like learn. I ran and owned the only school here in New Orleans for 13 years. And before that,
I mean, I
though,
didn't know
there
that.
was,
That's amazing. Of
mm-hmm.
course you,
I
I
closed
mean,
I closed it at pandemic because
okay.
pandemic. But yeah, I had the school for 13 years. But prior to that, there wasn't any education around it. It was just kind of like you just kind of move your hips around and roll some shoulders and flirt with the audience and start to take off your clothing piece by piece, And a lot of what was available to look at was just like some old YouTube videos and things like that, but there just wasn't a whole lot of resources. I didn't know what I was doing. But it was okay at the time because nobody else knew what they were doing either, so it was all right.
Mhm.
Um, and And I think what I started to learn as time went on was that my technique and all my technical studies were really beneficial to be able to hold my space on stage, connect with an audience, use an entire stage, fill the room, like those kinds of things. And then the other sort of more innate parts of me about how to move and what sensual movement looked like and how to use that movement to invoke the feeling I was trying to do in a performance and then putting those things together.
Mm.
Yeah. And it wasn't from a place of functionality, it was from a place of like, how can I make this the best performance that I possibly can? And some of the side effects of that were that I felt more confident in my body. And I was young. Like I said, I was 25 when I started. I was maybe 115 pounds soaking wet. Like I was teeny tiny. Had
Mm.
2 kids. I was still growing. I wasn't even like a fully formed human yet. You know what I mean? And so my body still had a lot of changes to go through. And as a person who was pretty tiny, I didn't have a lot of curves or shape. My boobs are really flat. Like I had more of a muscular build than not. And so I didn't check all the boxes of femininity necessarily, you
Mm.
know, and I
Mhm.
got a lot of criticism early on
Mm.
because all the other women were they had the curves and boobs and butts and hips and tiny waists and stuff like that. But what
Mhm.
my strong suit was that I could move in a way that was very different from what they could move. And
Mm.
something about it was intriguing to people. So they liked that. Um, and so that's what I did, and that's what I leaned in on.
Mm.
But over time, and then getting into the strip club and starting to learn where my power was there, which took a long time because you don't know. You're in your mid 20s, you don't know anything. You know a little more when you get older, right? And
I
then you
think you
still
know
don't
a
know
fair bit,
everything, and you
mid-20s.
still,
Yeah.
right, you still
My
just,
mid-20s, I thought was like, I have to have it figured out. I have to know it all.
yes, there's so much pressure.
Mhm.
Um, and so as I navigating the club and like watching how other people move, we are also we are creatures of like monkey see, monkey do, and we are pack animals in a sense. And so we learn how to do things by watching others and mimic. And so watching how other dancers move, particularly paying attention to the older dancers who were in the clubs who had been doing it for a long time and watching them and how they worked and how they moved and what worked and what didn't. And what felt aesthetically intriguing to me versus what didn't. Um, and then over pandemic, I also have a friend who is she calls herself well, she is a death doula, but she also coined this phrase called clit sit meditation.
Mm.
And it's
I'm so
basically
intrigued.
it's so good, but you use the touch of just the height. There's so many nerves, of course, and there's so much going on in that area, and you use it instead of it doesn't need to necessarily be the point of a pleasure seeking situation, but it is allows for focus.
Mm.
And so I was real scared of it for a while. I was like, I don't know, this sounds like really intense. And I think because I was a stripper and a burlesque performer, everybody just assumed that my sexual health was, I just must be swinging from the chandeliers, right? But I had a lot of trauma, and the clit sit meditation stuff really started to help me kind of get more comfortable, more embodied. I started to play around with especially during pandemic, and I started an OnlyFans just like a lot of people. And the way I always coin it is that I masturbated myself back into my body. So, uh, and
Like,
I know that,
hallelujah.
right? And I know that that's not maybe the case for everyone, but we
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
people with vaginas, or maybe you'd identify as women, or when those all whatever the case may be. And I just like to use these terms liberally because I don't know who's listening, and I
Hmm.
don't want anyone to think that your parts define your identity or vice versa. So when I say those things, like, please know that I'm just addressing you as the audience, with maybe we have the same body parts. So um and that can be separate of your how you identify and walk through the world
Yes.
as well. So I just say that to just reiterate to the audience that please just know that that's where I'm coming from. um but I think too, with the pressure of like especially if you're born female, raised, socialized as female, you are constantly reiterated and bashed over the head that your body is not yours. You have to keep it clean, keep it shaved, keep it pure, keep it skinny, keep it tanned, keep it no cellulite, keep it healthy, keep it. And it's not ever for
Exhausting.
you. It's for
Right.
everybody else.
Right.
It's for society. It's for your future husband. It's for the.
Yeah.
And so we are never encouraged to develop a relationship with our body purely for ourselves.
Mm.
We are only encouraged to do it for the benefit of others. And what I started to figure out through OnlyFans and through that work was that it really was more for me, and that the people that were getting to witness anything I decided to put out there were just really lucky.
Really lucky.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And and it really changed my whole relationship with my body and movement and how I wanted things to really change moving forward and how I wanted to use this information to just empower other people to do the same thing.
I love that. It's beautiful. And it
Yeah.
sounds like it came from allowing, and you'll correct or redefine, what I say here,
Mm-hmm.
allowing the space to slow down and be with yourself with not an expectation of needing to reach climax or anything, of
No.
just like what feels good, just acknowledging, just being with,
Yep.
yeah, some of our
Yeah.
most like intimate parts.
And it just is, that energy is really powerful, and it can be used for all kinds of things. It doesn't have to just be so, like, being able to know that if I was gonna masturbate or whatever, and I had an intention for what that energy was going to be used for at some point, whatever that looked like. So it
Mhm.
could be whatever, it could be anything. I don't care. Everybody's different. It's your choice. You get to make it up. You could be like, I'm going to masturbate so that I hit my financial goals this
Yeah.
month. Right? I'm going to masturbate and I'm going to send that energy towards hitting my financial goals this month. Or I want to be more open to making more friends, or I want to just feel content, settled, like whatever you can dream up.
I
you
love that you
can
named that.
take
Yeah.
you can take that energy and direct it wherever you want. And it's a practice of visualization and things like that. But it it works. And at least it's worked for me. And I know it has worked for other people, because I talk about it with them.
Yeah, no, it's a practice that, especially pandemic time when I had more time home alone,
Yeah, of
was
course.
really
Right.
doing. And last year also, especially, I had a really specific practice I was doing, but to use that for yeah, thinking of finances or abundance, or what came up to me,
Whatever.
one practice last year that was really surprising, showed up organically, was actually helping heal some ancestral trauma.
Yeah.
Like that the women historically in my lineage weren't allowed or were shamed for being in their pleasure, and that I with
Yeah.
like got to break. It was really beautiful, and so I love that you
Yeah.
name that, that it's a practice that like it can continue to help support you in whatever you're wanting, because it's
Yes.
helping to open your energetic field of being more
Yeah.
receptive. It's allowing you to be more receptive, which feels good in the process too. It's nourishing. It's
Yeah.
helpful and healing for our nervous system.
It is. It truly is. And there's such stigma around our body parts specifically. And there's so much mystery. And there's so much, which kind of brings us back to this, like, we have to do things like podcasts and Reddit threads and, you know, books and blogs and whatever, so we can create these resources for each other, because the other ways have kind of failed us,
Yeah.
up to this point.
Yeah.
um so yeah, and then, pole dancing, floor work, sensual, any type, like, if we look at the umbrella sort of like movement that is more sensual, and I
Mhm.
use sensual separate from sexual because I don't like people to feel pressured that their movement has to result in sex.
Yeah. It's a
Because
great
it doesn't.
distinction that I think we continually need to distinguish between
Yeah.
sensuality and sexuality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so sensual movement, meaning like is that if you can flip movement on its head and think about beginning and starting that movement from your pelvis and letting it move out from there.
Mm.
And typically we tend to not focus on the pelvis, right? The pelvis is like the home base of sin and blah 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 whatever. And you think about all the negative connotations. Look at all the judgment and criticism against Black women and other women of color, who their primary dances in their cultures are all rooted in their pelvis. And
Right.
think about how the world views that as obscene and terrible, right? And it's not. It's freeing and it's
Yeah.
beautiful and it's healthy and it's healing and it's
Oh,
tradition and
lovely.
it's
So lovely.
culture and
Yeah.
it's so many things. And I'm half Latina. My dad's from Nicaragua, and well, Nicaragua itself is like a conservative country, but if you just kind of look at like Latin America, things, the cultures and the dancing, anyway. And so in the umbrella of sensual movement and this idea of using your pelvis as the root of your movement rather than focusing on just creating it from extremities and never connecting with your pelvis at all,
Yeah.
you know? And then you take that and you just reverse it entirely. And I've worked with thousands of bodies at this point and seeing like tightness and how tight that the structures are of the pelvis and how that tracks into tightness and all these other areas, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
when the pelvis doesn't have any focus, it's unstable, And so with that instability comes tightness around it. So your hamstrings are tight and your hip flexors are tight and your back is tight, and then your
Shifts everything.
diaphragm is tight, so then your breath is shallow, and then your neck is tight. Like it's just like is a Tetris of
I mean, I think our pelvis is one of our most important, from even just a structural standpoint, important
yeah,
landmarks. And
it
to, I
is.
love that you're just naming, okay, even for somebody listening to this, if this is all new or seems out of reach for you, maybe even like, maybe
Right.
going in a dark room, being alone, setting a timer for 5 minutes and just playing with the idea, no end goal of what would it be like if I can just move from my pelvis for 5 minutes and letting
Totally.
it feel good and letting that be perfect and plenty and more than enough.
Yeah. And let's let that be it. You start
Yeah.
small, for
Yeah.
sure. For sure.
Um,
So yeah,
well, to kind of, I could ask you more questions. I think we
we
could
have so
continue
many
going, but
questions.
I know I'm loving everything you're sharing, just the direction this is going. I'd love if you, Bella, if you have something, maybe
Yeah.
your own practice or practice that you love of, if someone is wanting to live like a more embodied life and make that really radical choice for themselves, is there
Hmm.
a suggestion or tip that you have?
I think that uh, I mean, I'm such a supporter of dance, and you don't
Mhm.
have to be good at it. It doesn't matter. um, I tend to work with a lot of beginners, people who are just coming into movement for the first time or have been in movement but have not had any direction. It's maybe been self-led, and then they're kind of coming at it from the perspective of like, I've never been led before, so kind of beginner in that way. And I'll use pole as an example just because it's the thing I teach the most. And I think it's like this with any movement. But what I say to my newer students, I'm like, look, the great thing about this is that, listen, it's going to be awkward until it's not. And that's okay because every single other person in here is having moments of awkwardness as well. But
Mm.
the thing about this, what I love so much, is that you cannot do anything but focus on what is happening right in front of you and what
Mhm.
is happening in your body at this moment because you have to be so there. What is my arm doing? Where is my head looking? What is my leg doing? Am I engaging my butt cheek like she said? Or what happens if I try this? You
Mhm.
literally have no other option but to focus on what is happening in your body for that 1 hour. And it
And that is
sounds
a
like a real
gift.
and it sounds
Yeah.
like a really long time, but it goes by really fast. And what you start to learn is that it changes. I tell people, I'm like, in here, you can take up as much space as you want. As your body gets stronger, you will feel stronger in the world. You will go in the world, and people can't fuck with you the way they used to because you know what your body is capable of. And when you feel more connected to your body and you have more of a relationship with it, then the outside world has less of an effect on your existence and how you walk through the world because you know yourself so well that does that make sense?
Oh, 1000%. I'm
Okay.
so
When
with
we're
you.
not when we're not
Mhm.
embodied, it's too easy to
Mhm.
get pushed around and bossed around and told how we should feel or told what we should be doing or this is what's that. And because if you don't have that relationship with your own body, it's very easy to just be told what to do because it's like, well, I don't know, you know,
They must know best. They must,
they
yeah.
must know more
They're
than
the
me.
expert. They know.
Right. But when
Mhm.
you know it in yourself and you do the practice of going through the awkward parts and healing from an injury and recovering from a trauma and all of these things together, getting stronger, getting more flexible, like all of that stuff that just builds and builds and builds on your ability to be unfuckable with.
Yes. Love that. And that can start with a dance class.
And it can start with a dance class. It really can. And I recommend people to go to a dance class that isn't something that, not a ballet class necessarily, not, but like a floor work class or some sort of like pick the weirdest ass dance class that you can find and start there because there's usually the least amount of structure around it and everyone's looks weird. And
that's
it's
a good
okay.
suggestion. Yeah.
And nobody cares.
Yeah.
You know?
Everyone's probably more worried about what they're doing than what you're doing too.
Exactly. And I feel like when you start there and that becomes your comfort zone, then like you don't care about how you look or how you're moving in front of other people. Cause then if they have a problem with it, that's their problem, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I love that.
You know, it's like the day like at the cadaver lab. I know we didn't get into it, but
Oh,
when we were having movement sessions, and remember everybody was just kind of doing their own thing.
Yeah.
But like but not everybody could do it because it was too self-conscious to do that in it. But like think about it, like you could move. There were a bunch of us that were just moving around as freely but that comes with a sense of familiarity and comfort within their own body. I don't care how somebody else feels about how I'm moving. Get over it.
How your body's like, yeah.
You know,
and it felt so. We didn't get to talk about it, but yeah, as we were in a cadaver dissection lab together, and it was one of the more incredible, profound experiences I've been a part of. I loved it.
100%.
2 of the days, the end of lab, we ended with like a 90-minute movement. Say class, but wasn't really some structure, some not. And there was periods where it was instruction. We were just moving, and it feels so good too to get to be in an environment and do that with other folks.
Yeah.
And because maybe you come in contact with their body for a little bit. Maybe you don't. You engage, you don't engage. You're here with your body.
Right.
It's so incredible. And I really believe we need more and more and more of that in our world.
I agree. I'm in New Orleans, and so our social practices here are really built around like drinking and eating, you know, and that's a cultural thing. But like, I've led classes for like other sex workers and stuff like that, and just the practice of getting together and moving together, it changes things.
It does.
You know,
dynamics of groups, of relationships.
Yeah.
I think because it helps, especially when you're just moving how your body wants or what feels good, that it takes the ego out of it. And instead it's just, I'm so connected with myself that I will more naturally experience connection with others.
And I think it helps you to appreciate how others move, and it changes. It comes less from a place of judgment and critique, like maybe it did in the younger years. And it actually allows you to, because you can be like, oh, if I moved like that, that probably would feel so good on my hips, or you know, or whatever. Or you're like, man, that was so creative, or whatever.
Yeah, and everyone be like, oh, they're doing that. Like that does look like it feels good. I want to try it.
Yeah, I want to try it. Right.
Bella, thank you so much. I'm so glad to get to connect with you in this way.
Thank you. Likewise.
Hear your story.
I'm so happy.
I'm really grateful for all that you shared. I feel like there's so many nuggets of wisdom in there. And if anyone wants to like find more about your work in the world, where can they go?
Yep. Instagram is the best place. It is at Bella Blue Forever. I'm working on revamping my website, and so that will be up there too at some point. I'm so close to being done. It's like the bane of my existence. Websites are like, but they're so good once you get them done.
I feel like I'm always like, oh, now I need to change it again. Now I need to edit it again.
It's been long overdue. So it's happening. But yeah, for now, Instagram is really the best way to go. So it's at Bella Blue Forever.
Awesome. And I'll have that linked in the show notes so somebody can.
Awesome.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thanks again, Bella. And take care.